Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, we're talking about the best way to convert your audience into paying subscribers. It's been nearly a decade since the New York Times launched its metered paywall, and its success has spurred just about every digital publisher to test out some form of reader revenue strategy. Many have followed in the Times' footsteps and debuted metered paywalls. Others have rolled out various membership options, offering everything from behind-the-scenes footage to exclusive commenting features to convince readers to open their wallets. But which tactics actually work, and how should publishers determine what to charge? To answer these questions, I spoke to Jacob Donnely. Donnely is the managing director of audience and growth at Coindesk, one of the leading cryptocurrency publishers, and runs his own paid newsletter about the publishing industry. We talked about how to design the perfect subscription offering and debated whether subscription fatigue is actually real. Before we jump into the episode, I just want to remind my listeners that this podcast carries absolutely no advertising. The only way I monetize it is through paying subscribers. You may have noticed that there are some weeks when I don't put out new episodes. That's because I often get bogged down with paying consulting projects and it takes me away from producing this podcast. By subscribing, you'll not only make it easier to justify devoting time to the podcast, but you'll get subscriber-only newsletters from me that are packed with industry analysis. If I reach 600 paying subscribers, then I will start turning down all consulting projects and devote myself full-time to the newsletter and podcast. That means that you'll be guaranteed to get fresh podcasts and newsletters from me each week. Plus, don't you want to be proud to support an independent creator who's been busting his ass to deliver you content each week that helps you with your career? To subscribe, go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Pause this episode and become a subscriber right now. Okay, on to my interview with Jacob. Hey Jacob, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Simon. Thanks for having me on.
So you have a very interesting background in media, which we'll go through, but I was looking at your LinkedIn, and before you got your current job where you are now, it looks like you launched your own cryptocurrency newsletter. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so when I got into crypto, I guess it was almost 6 years ago. I started writing about it a lot for a variety of different publications and realized everyone had their own newsletter where they were just aggregating their own news, but nobody really was doing any curation at large of multiple different publications and things like that, nor were they providing any context. This was a few years ago, before there were discussions around newsletters being products in and of themselves. So I launched Crypto Brief, which was a weekly analysis newsletter where I would find 5 to 10 stories. I would write about a short paragraph, the context of those stories, and then I'd write a short essay, and I'd send that out. And I started doing that in beginning of 2016.
And what platform were you using for that?
Oh, it was a platform called Curated, curated.co. I think iOS Dev Weekly uses it. And basically what they allowed for was you could, if you found a story on that you liked, you could hit a Chrome extension and it would automatically add it to your backlog. And then when you logged into the system to actually curate the newsletter, you could just drag and drop where you wanted those stories to be. And it also came with a built-in ad server, you could say, in that a user or a potential sponsor could reserve a period of time. You could send them an invoice. It would block that time off. And then when that time came, the ad would automatically get inserted. It was a super cool tool. I liked it, but then they sold to, I don't know who they sold to, and I haven't seen any changes on it since.
And so you work now for Coindesk, which is probably the leading publication that reports on the blockchain and cryptocurrency and stuff like that. Was that newsletter how you got your current job?
No. So while I was building up that newsletter, I was also a freelance journalist for a variety of different crypto pubs. I wrote for non-crypto pubs as well. I've always just liked writing in my free time. And so I wrote for Coindesk as a freelance journalist for about 10 months. They found out that I had a background in SEO, that I had run the ad business at a previous job I had. And so they asked if I'd be interested in their director of marketing role. And that was how I went from being on the editorial side at Coindesk to being on the business side.
Yeah, but certainly, like, by having that newsletter, it probably kept your skills sharp, your knowledge sharp of the industry. Like, I'm always kind of interested in how kind of writers who write kind of like niche things on the side, how they can sometimes segue them to like a more kind of stable career? Do you think that kind of helped that you were basically writing this crypto newsletter, that you were able to get this job at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly did contribute. A media company is, at least Coindesk was really looking at their newsletters as a viable product. I had talked to their team already about me when I was still a freelancer about doing their newsletters. So my experience building newsletters and growing that audience certainly helped. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a variety of things. Coindesk was super small when I joined. It was a scrappy team, and I have done a variety of different things in my career. So I think that's what the newsletter helped a lot. Yeah, absolutely. But I think it was a variety of things that ultimately resulted in the team bringing me on.
And so your job now is like an audience growth director or something like
Yeah,
that?
so I do a variety of things at Coindesk. We're still pretty small relative for how many things we're doing. So my job right now is I am in charge of audience and growth, which means I'm thinking about how we get users on the site, but more than that, I'm starting to think about how we get users to stay around. Newsletters obviously is a big thing I think about a lot. But I also think a lot about how we can monetize the site. If anyone goes to the site right now, there's not a single ounce of monetization on it, which is by design because we just relaunched our site. But so I spend a decent chunk of my time thinking about how we can turn our site into a revenue driver again, for sure.
And so what are the things you're coming up with in terms of business model?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm really curious about, as you think about CoinDesk from as a financial publication, is what do these niche finance pubs do for monetization? And by and large, they look at memberships as a viable model. There's certainly a smart ad play there. CoinDesk is unique in that we do have some B2B audience, but we have a lot of B2C audience, or prosumer traders, as you could say. The way I like to think about it, and a lot of people in crypto in particular, this is the first asset class that was retail first. So most times, the hedge funds and the big rich family offices and all those groups get access to an asset first. And after they've created derivatives of products for 5-10 years, then the retail community gets involved. Crypto's the opposite way. It was the average person who got involved first, and only now hedge funds are getting involved. So we have a huge retail audience who's been around for years, and now we're starting to see the B2B side start to pop up for the more traditional
Yeah.
investor.
Well, I mean, it seems like it fits into the same kind of category as any kind of trade publication, and especially thinking along the lines of like a Bloomberg or a Wall Street Journal or DigiDay or anything that charge for subscriptions. Like it seems like you probably have a very captive audience, and then also an audience that, because you can actually give them actionable info in which they can generate revenue, they in turn probably value you pretty highly enough to where they would be willing to pay for some kind of access, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we're thinking about over the next, year, 18 months. We're lucky in that we have a great event. So that is where the majority of the business's revenue comes from. We put on an event every May called Consensus. Last year there were 5,000 people who came, roughly. So the math, you can do the math, but that's a good business for us. But now as the business matures, we're trying to think about, look, the mantra for media is very simple: diversify your business. And we don't ever want to be caught with a single revenue stream, and so we're aware of that. So
And what are the primary traffic drivers? Because it seems like this isn't something that would be ideal for Facebook in terms of people sharing it to their own networks and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, if you look, on like similar web, you could see. I mean, the majority of our audience comes from Google, because a lot of people, the way that people find crypto is either they've got a friend who talks about it nonstop, and we are certainly an annoying group of people because we don't shut up about it. But
Yeah.
let's just, say you don't have that annoying crypto friend. You're reading the New York Times, you're reading the Wall Street Journal, and you land on a story about it, and you read it, and you're looking at it, and you're like, that's interesting. And where can I find more information? Well, the Wall Street Journal doesn't have that information. Bloomberg doesn't have that information. So you Google. And we've been very fortunate to have a lot of just great evergreen guides that, people come, they land, they look at it, they look at our price pages, and as time goes on, that kind of creates that excitement. And then, we've got the largest newsroom in the world dedicated to this. A very large newsroom that just, they are reporting on both the markets, but also the technology and the disruption and the businesses that are trying these new business cases out. So it's it kind of creates that flywheel, and then every May they all come to consensus. So it's an interesting model. And being at CoinDesk, I've learned a lot about niche media, which is actually why I launched a media operator.
Well, I feel like there was, as a journalist myself, there was a time where I couldn't open up my inbox without having a pitch from some new blockchain startup, or I was constantly seeing new news about it. It seems like that's died down. Do you think some of the hype or the bubbles kind of burst a little bit in terms of that huge kind of rush, and now it's just the more hardcore people who are into it? Or what have you been noticing from a audience building standpoint?
Yeah, the market collapsed, at the beginning of 2018, basically, and as time went on, more and more of the people who had gotten in for speculative reasons kind of disappeared. And along with that, what you were probably getting were a lot of pitches about ICOs and a lot of questionable, financial instruments. Yeah, the people that have stuck around are certainly they're here for more of the right reasons. They're here because they're intellectually curious. They're here because, look, they do believe this is an asset class that is going to continue to grow. That there is something to be said about a monetary system that cannot be controlled by a central government. If those are opinions you share, there's intellectual curiosity. But it's starting to warm up again, right? Like the price has moved from, 5 to 10K over the past few months. That does then start to bring the same crowds that were around a few years ago. I start getting more messages from people saying, hey, should I be looking at this? Hey, what's going on? Traffic numbers are up, so it's definitely cyclical, and that makes it interesting. It makes it difficult as well. Dealing in a cyclical business can be frustrating. But I would say the bottom is behind us, and I qualify that by saying I'm not a financial advisor. Do not take financial advice from me, please, dear God, don't. But I would say that there is more to come in the future than behind us.
Yeah, I almost wonder if you'd rather be in the post bubble era, in the sense that you're, instead of doing the 101 type of coverage, you're able to do, create stuff for like a more advanced consumer of that news or something like that. That's a little bit more steady and predictable.
Look, it's fun on both sides, right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone who's in crypto, who has been in it for a while, has their aha moment when they're thinking about it through their own inherent biases, and they think about it and they go, well, no, this is important. This is interesting. This is all right. I can get behind this. And everyone has that aha moment. So I'll never, as long as I'm at Coindesk, I will never advocate for us to stop with the 101. I will continue to push hard on that, because I do think it's very easy to get scammed in this industry. When you're dealing with money in a wild, wild west sort of system, it's very easy for bad actors to get involved. CoinDesk can provide good, unbiased information, and it matters that it's delivered in a way that they understand it. It also matters that it's delivered in a way that is understandable from their context. Like, what I care about is different than what somebody else cares about. My job is different. So, it's important that we continue to serve the new audience who at some point might have their aha moment, and the audience that is more predictable. And finding that balance has been, I think, what makes CoinDesk a successful organization.
You mentioned a media operator, which is this other newsletter that you run. Tell me the story behind that and how you ended up launching that.
So the idea to do something around media actually came to be last year when I was at Digiday, was doing an event at Vail, and one of my friends was there, and we were hanging out on my hotel balcony, just having a conversation. And I was talking about how I missed writing and all of that. Because ever since when I joined Coindesk, I shut down Crypto Brief because it didn't really make sense to have a competitive product to my full-time job. So I, for a while there, didn't really have an outlet to help me stay up to speed on what was going on in media. So I was talking with him about it, and originally I was going to launch a podcast, and he's like, I think there's real value in the conversations that you can have with somebody. But then as time went on, and I started doing some research, I happened upon Substack, which I don't know if you ever spent. You have a newsletter on Substack, so a lot of the early newsletters on Substack were all crypto newsletters.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like one of the biggest newsletters is like this guy Anthony Pompliano. He's got a huge newsletter. There's a few other people who have all reached like top 25 in revenue that are crypto. So I was like, well, this is interesting. Substack. I remember when I launched Crypto Brief, Curated made it really easy for me to launch a newsletter. So let me look into Substack. I looked at it. I saw how easy it was. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to do this instead. And I launched the newsletter. I wrote my first piece. And right around the time I was tweeting out that I announced it, which was the same day I wrote, my girlfriend asked me, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I launched a newsletter. It was, I had wanted to do it, but the time from, all right, I'm going to do it to when I launched it was very crunched, which is actually what makes Substack so interesting as a platform.
Yeah, because like it's great because it's so lightweight, it's easy to use. I feel like the reason why it's caught on so well is because the previous things that were available to everybody, like MailChimp, were just like that. It wasn't very good for editorial type work. It was more kind of marketing focused, and it had way too many features, which is Substack kind of borrowed from Medium in the sense of having a more elegant, pared down version where, it didn't take a lot of knowledge. You could just jumpstart it, and it's completely free to use, and there's kind of like a cool kids version of it that I think was starting to happen with Tiny Letter. And I don't know if you remember that era when it seemed like every writer was launching a Tiny Letter, but then MailChimp basically let Tiny Letter die on the vine. So Substack kind of benefited from the rush to independent newsletters because it had this great free product that looked really good.
Yeah, that's definitely, it was, you got two things at once, which is what Curated gave. You got a website that listed every issue, and then you got a very easy way to send a newsletter. Both of those were great. Now, I am historically anti-platform. I do not hide these opinions. It's not an original phrase, but there's, the team over at Copyblogger started really popularizing a phrase called digital sharecropping. In that, in that if you build on somebody else's platform, you're really just renting their space. And at some point, it's going to crash and burn on you. And so Substack was the first time that I built on a platform that I felt relatively comfortable with it. Now, I certainly have had my issues with Substack, and I've written about them, but I liked the fact that when push came to shove, the list was mine. If I needed to leave for whatever reason, I wasn't going to have to start over. Whereas if I was, I know that you've published on Medium, like if if I was publishing these on Medium and then Medium changed the game on me, actually they did do that. They started with their paywall. I would get screwed, and it's too important. Like media companies and independent producers and publishers, they always get screwed.
And I'm actually planning to publish an article about why I moved from Medium to Substack. And it really speaks to everything you said, that the medium that I joined and started publishing a lot of content to and saw a ton of success with. Like some of my first articles or my initial articles I wrote for Medium were just like drove a ton of traffic. They got a lot of organic shares and stuff like that. And like Medium changed its business model. And hey, I really love their business model. I love that they're trying to figure out a sustainable way to pay writers, but basically because I'm not playing along with that business model, like I'm not putting my stuff behind the paywall, I have over 9,000 followers on Medium, and they're not seeing most of my content because Medium isn't showing it to them because I'm not playing into their new business model. Whereas, as you say, with Substack, it's distributed on a decentralized network, which is email. So there's no algorithm that's going to fuck with your following in that way. And then, as you also say, you can basically download an Excel file of all your email addresses and then take it to a different email newsletter platform. So there's at least you at least have the option of walking away and taking your network with you.
Right. And Substack works for what I'm trying to build right now, which is, I've got an email that I charge a little bit of money for. There's commenting, like I will at some point launch the newsletter, the podcast, and that will go through, Substack. So it works for this like solo niche, newsletter type business. I don't know if I would launch like a traditional media company on Substack because again, I am a firm believer in diversified revenue streams, and I don't hold the same animosity towards advertising that a lot of people do. I think that if it is done correctly, it is a viable model. Now it has gotten too extreme with the programmatic cookie based at targeting and things like that. But especially in the niche B2B space, like if I wanted to launch a publication about media, right? Let's say I wanted to compete with Digiday. If there are companies that have product offerings that media professionals would want to know about, and those are viable advertisers. So, I don't know if they would be great for large media companies, though. I mean, there are some that are building on top of them. But for what I'm trying to build, it's the first platform that I am actually happy to have behind me, and I don't see myself leaving anytime soon.
Yeah, so like one of my consulting clients is the Dispatch. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's like a right of center publication
Yep.
of like former Weekly Standard and National Review people who launched a publication on Substack. And they kind of, to speak to what you were just talking about, like, yes, they're monetizing through paid subscriptions, and they're not going to have any ads on their website or within their newsletters. At least they're not planning to in the near term. But they also are having podcasts, so they're able to diversify their revenue by they plan to sell ads on their podcast, and then they're also going to have like a annual live event. So obviously they could sell sponsorships to that, and then also tickets, obviously. So yeah, you're not necessarily precluded from incorporating ads into it. And also, I'm sure like Substack wouldn't stop you if you wanted to put native ads, like handwritten ads, into your newsletter. But they are very anti-programmatic ad tech or anything like that, and they've basically said we will never add that in. So I mean,
which they should be. Like, don't get me wrong, they 100% should be against that. The ad tech business has become horribly perverted. It is not a good system. It is not reader friendly. It is not publisher friendly, and it is not advertiser friendly. It is friendly to no one but ad tech. So don't get me wrong. I am not sitting here saying that we should be adding, tracking pixels and things like that. But even that example right there of a handwritten native ad, right? This is the only thing that I would want Substack to build for me to support that is give me a self-serve system where somebody can come along and say, I would like to sponsor your next week's Tuesday newsletter, because that's a free newsletter that, I send out to people. Great. You want to sponsor that? This is your logo. Here's some text that here's what you would like the message to be. I can approve that. I can embed that. And then when it's done, I can then get results on how many people clicked that ad. Done.
Yeah.
No tracking, none of that. But if you give me that, well, now I feel fully comfortable to launch a niche B2B newsletter or B2B media company on your platform because it's subscriptions, it's advertising. Let's get to the events, which we could use a third-party platform for events. It's podcasts, so now I can do podcasts. I've got 4 revenue streams, boom, right there. That is a diversified business, and I would feel very comfortable with that. Because unfortunately, and not unfortunately, but you only can monetize a percentage of your readers through subscription, which is why having the ad model also helps, because that then means you're monetizing everything. But again, it's their platform. I'm not sitting here saying I'm going to leave because of this. It's just the one thing that, if I were to ever launch a media company like that is more than just a solo operation, it's one of the things I'd have to consider.
Yeah, and certainly depending on how large the media company it is, it might be worth it to you to create something more bespoke anyway, where you're actually paying to have a more robust system like Mailchimp, where you can have more control over who you're targeting with each newsletter and incorporate it. You could basically build a Substack from scratch. It just takes a lot of work. Yeah, I've had Hamish McKinsey, the co-founder of Substack, on my podcast, and also just talking to him behind the scenes and other people who've talked to him. Yeah, they have no interest in ads whatsoever, and I mean, good for them for staying 100% focused. And that's kind of like what Ev Williams did with Medium, where they just realized like we just need to focus on one thing and just doing it really well. And for them, it's allowing newsletter writers to basically charge for a really elegant solution for delivering paid newsletters. And yeah, if they want to do a bespoke version of a handwritten ad, I'm sure they could do that, or the podcast ads or whatever. But yeah, they want to keep focused on just the newsletter. So for your newsletter, tell us about, like, for the free version, we'll get to the paid version in a minute. Tell us about how you kind of design that, like, or in terms of the kind of content that you have.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I originally launched the newsletter was I would be reading a lot of news and other people's writings about media, and I would have thoughts, and writing my thoughts is a great way for me to process them. So the Tuesday newsletter that I send out is just reactions to other things I've read. It can be reactions to news, it can be reactions to analysis. But yeah, it's focused entirely on that. And that goes out every Tuesday, typically 3 pieces of news within there. Everyone's in,
Yeah, so you're curating a piece of news, but then you're also adding a layer of your own analysis and expertise that you're adding
right.
to
Yeah,
it, right?
it's the closest, not the closest, but it is an example. Like, it's like what Ben Thompson does with Stratechery, with where he something will happen in the news and he will write about that. So that is what I am. I'm doing here. Sometimes it's great and I get a ton of people replying. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the analysis is not enough on top of the news, and I'm still learning. It's, like I said, it's only 5 months old, 6 months old.
How did you build the audience for it? Like, how did you start growing? How did you start driving people to sign up for the free version?
So I announced it, and I got about 50 people to sign up through Twitter, which was awesome. But then I started writing about a few of the companies that I find most interesting, and I wrote about. So I can kind of pinpoint a few of the ones I've written about that kind of had little spikes of audience growth. I wrote about the aging media guys, and wrote about their business, and I thought how cool it was. That I saw a few people come in. Wrote about Industry Dive when they got acquired, and or majority acquired, I suppose. And then Sean, I don't know if you've ever talked to Sean, but he's the CEO of Industry Dive. He
Yeah, we're actually scheduling a phone call very
Awesome.
soon
Yeah,
together.
he's
Yeah.
he's a super smart operator. Like, he is, if like I had like a rankings of like great operators, he is like right up top. So anyway, so he read my analysis about the deal, and I commented on what I thought was going to happen, and all of that, and he messaged me on Twitter about it, and then he shared it, and I can zoom in on my analytics and see when he shared my newsletter, and it is just like a straight line up in growth because he just drove a ton of signups. I then started talking to the guys at Morning Brew. They started to share it a lot, and if the best newsletter team in the world is sharing your newsletter, you're onto something. So they also kind of helped, and it's just from there I would just get these little bursts of audience growth. And it's kind of go from there.
And I think the key, and I think Substack is really good for it because, and this is something I keep on hammering home, it's a newsletter company, but it's a newsletter company that where the content looks really good on the web. Like,
Yeah.
it's very comparable in terms of prettiness to Medium. And I was having such a hard time when I was on Tiny Letter growing my subscription, my sign up numbers, because like I was publishing my articles on Medium and then trying to drive the Medium readers to sign up for my newsletter. Whereas like Substack, I'm just publishing the entire article to Substack. So then I'm able to drive a lot of traffic. Like, I had an article that I published like last week that just got like several dozen shares on like social media, and that of course drove a huge spike in signups for my newsletter. So I think like this kind of 2.0 version of a newsletter, that yes, it's a newsletter, but it also just looks really good on the web and is really easy to share on social media, is key in terms of scaling the audience a
I
little bit
mean,
more.
and I say this with a lot of quotes, but in the old days of the internet, we all blogged, right? And then we started going, all right, well, we should also add a newsletter to this. But that was done in an inefficient way. We would have our blog, and then we would have a form to get people to sign up for our MailChimp account, and then we'd write the blog, and then the newsletter would just be like an RSS feed of what we had written. So it was very disjointed. And even when with Tiny Letter and all that, it was disjointed. With what Substack did is, I've got a blog, like I've got a place for me to write, and it's automatically linked to my newsletter, and that making
Yeah.
that seamless is the huge power that system's got. And
Well, it's threefold. So yeah, like you just said, you got the blog itself. That's a self-sustaining publishing platform. It integrates directly and is also the newsletter, and the payment part is
Mhm.
seamless in the sense of like the payment system is built into it as well. So it's an all-in-one platform to where you can have this multi-functionality and do things to these different audiences free. Like I don't know if you do this. I don't think you do this, and I think you definitely should, and you should look at what I'm doing. Is my newsletter, the one that ends up in the inbox, looks very different than what looks on the web. So like I send the newsletter to the inbox and it has different calls to action because these are people who already know who I am, who are subscribed. Then after that's sent out, I then go and edit the article that's on the web and start redesigning it, thinking like, okay, a person who's landing on the web version is probably someone who's coming in through social
Yeah.
media or Google. They don't know who I am. So I need a completely different, like there needs to be a good header image so it looks good when it's shared on Facebook or Twitter or on LinkedIn. I need my call to action to be different. Like they need, this person doesn't know who I am that lands on this. They need different context than someone who is receiving in the inbox. So I would definitely encourage you to think about that. With yours, because I looked at the web version, it's very similar
It's
to
identical.
the newsletter versions. So I've seen a lot of success with that. And then I can't remember what my next point after that was. But anyway, so you recently launched a subscription version. Tell me about like your early thinking on around that. Like any good subscription product that comes out hopefully has a lot of planning behind it. What was your kind of initial thinking about what your value
Yeah,
proposition
so
would
I
be?
did spend quite a bit of time thinking about what paid would mean. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to just throw it up and kind of hope that something would happen. But at the same time, I didn't want to get stuck in, analysis paralysis. So my thought with going paid was, at this point, I've got 1,100 people on my list. But I guess when I went paid, I had just over 950 people on the list. And I thought a lot about, all right, who are these people? And the people that I'm seeing they're super smart. They're talented. They're the exact people I would want to talk to. And I was talking to them. We were emailing back and forth. And I thought, all right, well, is there a community for these people that, is exclusive? And there are some out there, but nothing that was really, really deep into media. So I thought about it more, and I went, all right, the I think it's Jessica over at the Information who says if you're going to launch a subscription, your content needs to be 10 times better than anybody else's, because otherwise there's information overload. So it's there's no reason to pay for something. And I was thinking about what I was writing, and I write a blend of strategic and tactical pieces. I can one day write very high level, and then the next talk very nitty gritty about 2 pages that I think every publisher should have on their website. And I thought about that and went, all right, I'm going to charge. Right now it's $100, but in March it'll be $200. I'm going to charge $200 for access to these essays, because I believe if an operator gets one good piece of information, that is worth more than $200. And that was kind of what I was thinking about when I launched this. Was if I'm going to charge, do I believe I can give one good piece of information? Because it's not like I'm charging thousands of dollars and you've really got to like hardcore justify it. For $200, can someone get a good piece of information that's either applicable to their business or validates something they're already thinking about? And based on the replies that I had been getting to the newsletter over the previous months before launching paid, that was happening. A lot of people were saying, that's what I'm thinking about, or I hadn't thought about it that way. That's really helpful. Or, wow, that's interesting. But what about this instead? And they checked me, and I was, and the conversations just kind of went from there. That was, ultimately resulted in, and my belief, and it's worked, that people would pay for what I was saying, which was interesting.
So to translate what you're saying, like let's say someone's paying and receiving this newsletter on a regular basis, and in one of your newsletters issues, you come up with this actionable insight of how they should create this a specific kind of landing page or something, and the light bulb goes on in their head, and they use the landing page, and because they're operating on media level, that this is a scalable level, and that might produce thousands of dollars in income or even millions of dollars depending on how large the company is. So in your head, you're saying their calculation is, I by just that one piece of insight, I just created thousands of dollars or millions of dollars or whatever in value, and that's far greater than $200. So therefore, the $200
That's my
is worth it.
belief. And as I think about churn and people wanting to renew and things like that, if the information is really good that you're providing to them, that they're able to some extent, my newsletter is a B2B newsletter. If it helps their business, even just a little, even if it just sets them down the path to ultimately helping their business, at $200, like we spend $200 on a lot of random things. So if it's one thing that a few steps later gives you success or immediately gives you success, if this gets the thought going, then I think that there's a long-term play there. And I think that that's how most B2B media really works, is that information that is applicable to your business.
Yeah, and it's also kind of like a necessary kind of that you charge like a decent amount for these more kind of bespoke independent publications just because of like the scalability of it. Like if I charge, so I'm for my newsletter that I'm the paid version I'm rolling out, it will have rolled out by the time this episode comes out. I'm charging about $100 a year. I could get to 1,000 subscribers and I mean hypothetically get to 1,000 subscribers and make $100,000 a year, which would be a decent middle class income. But if I were to charge half as much to and charge $5 a month or $50 a year, I would have to get 2,000 subscribers in order to make that same amount. And I don't think that by cutting the price in half that I am more likely to get twice as many subscribers, if that makes sense. Like it doesn't scale in that way. There's only going to be a limited audience for it. And because there's only a limited audience, you need to price appropriately. It's like the difference between selling a muffin at Walmart versus selling like a super customized muffin at like a independent bakery or something like that. They're just going to be coming in at two different price points, but they're also offering two different things in terms of quality and what the consumer is getting out of it.
Right, and that's the real thing, is that you have to think about with these niche products, especially the solo niche products, like how many people really exist out there. Like some of the largest newsletter I think that's on Substack is about China, right? I think it's called Cynicism,
Cynicism, yeah,
and it's the largest one if you read the rankings based on revenue, right?
yeah,
But his market is huge. You wouldn't think it immediately, but like for example, like I know people who work in hedge funds who like they will buy 10 to 20 licenses, seats, or subscriptions, right, for one hedge fund. So like
yeah.
that, like he's got a ton of people on there. You're talking investors, you're talking policymakers, you're talking, government officials. You're just talking so many people that he's got, even niche, he's got a really big business. Whereas in media, especially with a media operator, how many of them are out there? So
Yeah.
if there are just not that many out there, as long as I'm providing really, really good information that either validates their opinions or gives them a way of thinking about something through a different light, like that alone is worth the money. And that's why I was originally going to charge $100, and I went, you know what? No, the difference between $100 and $200 is not that big from like a decision making perspective and the approval perspective that I'm going to charge $200. And right now it's only 100 until March, but we'll see what that
Well,
goes.
I think you should like not think of your audience as just people working at traditional media companies. Like I look at like the email addresses who sign up for my newsletter and also talk to people who listen to my podcast. It's people not just who work in media; it's people who work in marketing, advertising, public relations, or just about any like a lot of different companies. Like every single company now has to be making content,
Right.
whether it's all the way down to just social media content, to blog content, to video, podcast, and everything. And when you think about that, like a lot of the insights that you are sharing, yeah, they're about traditional media companies, but they're actually like best practices and stuff that that any company that has to create content and as part of their marketing apparatus. So I would encourage you to definitely think a little bit broader about who your potential audience is, and it might be bigger than you might think. But so you set your price at $200 a year. That's a little bit higher than the average Substack. I think the minimum that you can charge is $5. How did you settle on that price point?
Yeah, so $5 I think is if you are a consumer focused newsletter, and there are many of those that are on Substack, and that's the politics ones and things like that. $10 is, in my opinion, $10 has to be the bare minimum for any sort of a business community.
Yeah.
It's just, and at $10, it really is. It's really hard to argue against $10. I chose $20 or $200, just because I had $100 typed in, and then I sat there for a couple of minutes and really thought about it and went, well, if someone comes to my site in 6 months, right, and I've really grown this and I've got a lot of great content, I don't think $200 is unreasonable, because I believe I'm delivering value. But at the same time, I went, but I really do, like, my early subscribers who I've built up relationships with. Like, I don't want, like, it's a different like kind of conversation we've had. So that's kind of why I settled on the $100 until March, and then the $200, just because it felt right. I didn't do a lot of deep analysis into what to charge. I just had this thing in the back of my mind that said, charge more than you think you should charge, and
Yeah.
it's easier to come down than go up.
Yeah, and when I was talking to different people about mine, they were like, kind of one of the pieces of advice is like it should be a little bit painful for some of your for like, and not, this isn't just with subscriptions, it's what charging money for anything. Like you should almost be embarrassed to ask the amount of money that you're like, the way that she put it is like you should almost be embarrassed to say I deserve $250 an hour, or whatever the
Right.
price point is that you're charging someone, because you should be stretching those limits. And as you say, you can always come down. I have a big long article. It will have already come out by the time this episode comes out, really going deep, like 1,800 words on the information's paywall and why it's so successful. And she charges $400 a year, but she's also able to have student or discounts for people who are under 30. She also has a $30 a month app that is a lower price point, but then it also can be an entryway, like basically a lead generator for the more expensive product. So it is easier to come down, and like you get to pitch it as like, until March, I get my loyal readers who were there first. They get to come in, pay the $100, and then feel like they're getting a deal.
Exactly. With regard to the information, I think she could probably charge more if she wanted to. I'm pretty sure that she kind of just settled on a number. I was at one of her events recently, Jessica's, and I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure she sort of just was like, $400 feels right. Because I think she compared herself to the Wall Street Journal, what they charge, which is similar, and FT, which is similar. And she was like, I'm in this group. This is the type of content I produce. So that feels right. But the amount of value that she is providing and her team provides to their readers, and they report on things months before the Wall Street Journal even does, you can charge more for that. And, but it's also like, once you're at a price point and you've established that, how do you go up? And that's what I want to prevent.
I mean, there's probably a pretty high overlap with her readership and people who pay $20,000 a year for a Bloomberg terminal.
Right.
So $20 a year as a rounding error. But also you want to reach like the widest audience possible. So like you don't just get into journalism to make money. You also want to have impact and stuff like that. So you have to kind of calculate that into it as well. There's a lot of coverage of this, successful subscription models right now, especially with like the New York Times and the Washington Post posting such amazing numbers. But I think a lot of publishers are now waking up to the harsh reality that it's actually really freaking hard to get people to subscribe. I'm sure you're starting to see that with your own conversion numbers in terms of like where you kind of start hitting the ceiling. I mean, do you agree that like we had their first round of really successful pay models, but I think we're letting the success stories kind of create like unrealistic expectations on how hard it is to actually grow this kind of
Yeah, I
business?
don't think it's hard to get somebody to pay for the first year. I think it's hard to get somebody to renew. Everyone's willing to give people a chance. Um, but this is media is very guilty of this. Media loves to pivot to new ideas, right? Like a few years ago it was video, and now it's podcasts, and now it's subscriptions, and it's just like it's the constant. And the media businesses that are most successful are the ones. And this is actually, I'm writing about this essay tonight. After we're done for tomorrow, is the media businesses that are most successful are the ones that stick to what they do, right? And the
Yeah.
one that I think about a lot is Dotdash. Dotdash comes from about.com, like old school SEO driven business. Their service journalism, if and their content is fine, right? It does a great job for its community. They're super profitable, right? Why? They just focus on what they do well. They build communities around, they build these niche publications, or they buy them now. Now they're acquirers, and they've just perfected their model. So they're fine, right? Whereas like a lot of these other media businesses, they kept pivoting. They kept like, we're going to do this. No, we're going to do that. No, we're going to do this. And it's just, so what we're going to see happen is two things. One, with subscriptions, you might have got them to sign up for the first time, but you're still kind of creating bad content. So they're not going to resubscribe. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is, this is, I don't remember who I saw tweet about this. I think I'm blanking on his name, but I think it's the CEO of Scroll. He tweeted out that the success of the New York Times and the Washington Post with subscriptions is actually going to be very negative for the rest of the businesses trying to build subscription models. Because if there are only so many subscriptions that somebody is willing to have, and I don't know what that number is, then you have to decide as a consumer, are you going to go with the New York Times or are you going to go with this small publication? And so the New York Times now has such scale that I'm going to go with the New York Times because they've got 1,500 journalists who are reporting on literally everything versus that one niche. Unless you are able to go so deep on that niche that matters a lot to that person. And for most generalist publications that are trying to get into subscriptions, they just can't do it.
Yeah, although I think the conversation around subscription fatigue is a little bit too simplistic.
Yeah.
I had a tweet thread I did last night where I kind of did the math. I was like, let's say the average maximum number of subscriptions, of digital subscriptions for every adult in America is one, which like that's just the average. You're going to have power subscribers who subscribed up to 10. You're going to have lots of people who subscribe to 0, but let's say it averages to 1. So that would be there are 200 million adults in the US, and this is just the US, not counting the fact that we could scale different businesses across the globe. Let's say it takes like and we're not counting advertising or anything like that, just talking about subscriptions. And let's say to sustain the average editorial job, it takes 1,000 subscribers. So 200 million subscriptions are up for grab. Divide that by 1,000. That would support like 200,000 editorial positions. And that could be anything from like people like us who have our independent newsletters to people who work at the New York Times to people who work for your local newspapers. Like 200,000 positions just in the U.S. And that's before you take in other business models like advertising and events and stuff like that. I think that's like a lot of different ways you can splice 200 million subscriptions. Like, yeah, a lot of them will go to the New York Times, but at the end of the day, like if you're creating a product that people are addicted to and love and everything like that, and you have a strong brand, I think that I don't think like subscription fatigue really is going to be that much of an issue, because it's going to be about kind of carving out the people who are obsessed with your one product. Like every newspaper had a subscription model prior to the internet, but people weren't worrying about fatigue to print magazines and newspapers. I think it's a weird thing to fixate on. Like, yeah, like most consumers are only going to subscribe to two or three things, but multiplied out to every single consumer, those two or three things scale out to hundreds of millions of subscriptions that can be divided up into tons of different ways with different publications. And it's not all going to be the New York Times. It's going to be niche products. It's going to be, general newspapers, local newspapers, and then things like what we're
Yeah.
doing, which is niche. So I don't think that's going to be like a
The
major
only the
problem moving
only
forward.
I guess exception to that, or the caveat to that, is we have become, when magazines and newspapers were doing their subscriptions back in their glory days, there weren't that many other subscription offerings out there besides those products. Like, that was the primary product that was a subscription. Then you had, your cable, I guess. Beyond that, that was pretty much it. Now everything is a subscription. Like, when I every month Trunk Club shows up at my front door. Why? Because my girlfriend subscribes to it. Plus, we've got the New York Times. Plus, I've got Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus. Plus, I get Butcher Box once a month, which is a subscription because I like, I get meat because I'm on the keto, train for that, right? Then, you've got a variety of other subscriptions. Now, let's take it one step farther. Now there are some financial advisors who, rather than charging a AUM, a 1% fee, they're just saying, you know what? We're going to charge a subscription, $150 a month, and you get access to your financial advisor. So, like, our society has moved so much more towards subscriptions because it is a great model, that it's a little different than when the newspapers and magazines existed. Now, you're not wrong in that if you create great content, people will subscribe, but it's going to take some time for a lot of these older media companies, or not older, but like these larger ones, to get away from their model of creating bulk content for generalist audiences versus creating niche content for smaller, very loyal audiences. And that's going to take some rewriting of DNA.
And do you think, like, in terms of the last 10 years prove that like people will actually pay for news, to at least to a certain extent, where we're seeing some successful models? I wonder what you think about like how it's going to change in terms of what they're offering, because like I kind of feel like, and you can disagree with me, the meter paywall has kind of run its course. Now that so many people have learned how to get around it, and then Google Chrome is now changing its incognito mode, so it's harder to detect. I feel like it's going to get harder to make the metered paywall work, and so you're starting to see more movement towards like freemium models, membership models, and stuff like that. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm a big fan of testing this out for your particular site. So what works on one will not work on a different one, and a meter paywall might work for some pubs. And I think it was the Shorenstein Institute that did a study that showed that metered still works. Publishers are just not being strict enough with their metering. But I'm a big fan of understanding the types of content different audiences on your site are consuming, and then I guess this is the freemium model, gating those specific types, right? So if I were to think about let's think about a crypto site, right? Up top, you've got everybody, right? Everyone's just coming to your site learning about it, but maybe you can charge the people money who are using your data or your information to make trades, right? That's a subset of your total audience. Now, you really can't do that with metering, because metering is just like, cool, you hit 3 articles, done. Whereas doing it based on the section is a way to start to target the specific audience that is most likely to want to pay. And that's kind of what we do on Substack, right? Like, I use my curation newsletter to get audience in, and then I use the paid one to keep, to generate revenue. Why? Because I feel like the essays are more likely to get the right audience to convert.
Yeah, and I think like publishers are also thinking about like what are things we can offer in addition to just content. Like, what if we keep most of our content for free, but give, like one of the big drivers for the information is that like you can go in and you're and comment on their
Yep.
articles, and the only other people who you're commenting with are like top executives at like Google or Apple or something like that, because it's such an exclusive kind of club, and they have a Slack channel that you get access to and stuff like that. They have events where they don't. I don't think they charge extra money for their events. You get in if you're a member. So like stuff like that, where it's kind of like an ancillary benefit, but like people value that kind of stuff. So then you get to have your cake and eat it too, is you can keep on creating cheap or free content for the widest popular audience, but you can give like additional services on top of that.
And the nice part about that is, the information might not charge for their tickets, but they've always got a couple sponsors of those events. So now suddenly, let's go back to diversified revenue streams. Now suddenly they are bringing in sponsor revenue that they couldn't get on the website alone. And that then kind of creates that diversification that's really important for any media business. So yeah, community is a huge part of these niche communities. One of the things that I really am going to work on with the media operator is, how do I get the community commenting more? How do I get the community engaged? Substack supports a feature called discussion threads. How can I get those discussion threads to be a way to get people to participate? Because if people are communicating with each other, I believe that makes something very sticky. And that means that the content isn't the only reason, it's just one of the reasons to stay subscribed.
Okay, Jacob, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find more of your work online?
Yeah, you can just go to amediaoperator.com. My Tuesday newsletters are free, and until March 12th, my Friday essays are only $100 for the year. And on Twitter, I'm Jaycodon, Jaycodon. I tweet about crypto and media, so it's a bit of a bizarre mix.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot, Simon.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast, so if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.